All right, everyone. Thanks for joining me here on the web on this kind of truncated version of the civil rights movement. It's an important movement, so I need you guys to kind of get through these videos. I'm going to have to probably break it up into several pieces. I'll let you know as we kind of move through the lecture here as to how many different videos there'll be to watch. There are going to be quite a few, actually, because there's some like newsreel footages I want you to watch or film clips I want you to watch that aren't going to be able to be played on this video. So you'll have to go. We'll stop lecturing for a second. You'll go reference them. You'll play that video on Blackboard. Then you'll come back and continue the lecture from where we left off. So please kind of keep this in mind. This is going to take a little while. You're going to have to do a little bit of work. I'm going to have these videos I want you to watch posted on Blackboard, but you will need to kind of go back and forth a little bit here to kind of make this work. Okay. All right, so let's kind of get into this. We're going to talk a little bit about the civil rights movement here as quickly as I can. Again, we're going to move fast, so please read your book, kind of look through information there to kind of supplement this, to kind of make sense of a lot of what we're going to look at. We're going to look at some high points here. So kind of looking back on this, right? What we've already kind of seen is 1950s is a big time in the United States. There are all these big changes happening economically, socially, right? Things like conformity, booming economy. People are out spending money. Cars are taking over America. Suburbs are taking over America. There are these ideas that a man's supposed to go and take care of his family and work and support them. A woman's supposed to stay home, take care of the kids and the house and her family. Right, these ideas of gender roles, but then there's also these more rebellious parts, right? We looked at that with what the youth movement's doing, kind of taking up new actions, things like rock and roll and these kind of angst movies filled with rebels that kind of fighting back against these conformist societies, right? So there's a lot going on in the 1950s in the United States, and probably one of the most important things that we've seen already in a couple parts in our lectures is the civil rights movement that comes on the scene. One of the big events of this civil rights movement, the thing that really kicks it off, was that decision of the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board, that yes, separate but equal does violate the 14th Amendment, that inherently putting a group of people in another section, telling them that can't be with everybody else, inherently creates the impression of inferiority, that somehow that group of people isn't the same as everybody else. The civil rights lawyer, the NAACP lawyer that kind of handles this case, kind of takes it over as Thurgood Marshall, uses these new inventive kind of types of testimony, these psychological evidence that was brought forward in the doll test that we talked about, right? That kind of showed the effects of segregation and what it was having on a lot of African Americans. So it was this big moment, but as we saw, there were some limits here, right? The court doesn't give a timetable, doesn't say how desegregation is supposed to take place, who's going to enforce it and make sure that schools actually have desegregated. So there's a lot of things that have to be resolved here. At the same time, Southerners aren't going to take this easily. They're going to fight back. They want things to stay the way they are. They do not want things to change. So there's just as much opposition as there is movement for change. A lot of Southern lawmakers, even those in the federal government, senators and congressmen from the South, all come out and say that the Brown decision is abuse of federal power, that the federal government can't come in and tell states and local governments how their schools are supposed to run. Those are things that are supposed to be left up to the states and the local school districts. To make sure that the Brown decision's never carried out in their home states or in their home locations, a lot of white Southerners get together and create these things called citizens' councils, kind of doing the same thing that the Ku Klux Klan had done back in the 1890s and early 1900s. In fact, a lot of them were called country club clans, and they were made up of a lot of the community leaders, the people that actually ran the towns, people like the mayor, the city managers, councilmen and women, bankers, the leading business people of the town. They would be the ones that would be running this. A lot of times even the sheriffs or the police chiefs would also be on these country club clans, these citizens councils, to make sure that none of these civil rights initiatives took place in their towns, that they didn't have to desegregate. And they would endorse and use violence at a lot of times to make sure that the leaders of these civil rights groups that were in their towns knew that they were being targeted, that the white Southerners weren't going to allow these changes to take place. Right? So there's a lot of confrontation going on here, and there's a lot of abuse going on here, especially from white Southerners against black Southerners. Right? At the time, the President of the United States doesn't really want to get involved in this. He doesn't like the Brown decision. He thinks it's kind of taking our focus away. For Eisenhower, he's much more interested in the international aspects of America at this time. He's much more focused on that containment policy, how to deal with an aggressive, possibly more and more nuclear Soviet Union, one that now has a missile that could reach the United States, right? That's where his focus is. So he doesn't want to really kind of deal with these internal issues, these desegregation issues, these issues of the Jim Crow laws. He'd much rather things just kind of stayed the way they were. So he's not going to want to move very quickly. But in 1957, Eisenhower does have to deal with this confrontation between these two sides. Kind of in these two pictures is our two groups. One group, African Americans, protesting against segregation, saying that their children are being treated illegally, wanting change. On the left side, white Southerners. In this case, a group of them on the steps of the Arkansas state capitol in Little Rock, saying things like race mixing is dangerous, that they're not for it. Then look closely at the signs. They say race mixing. They're equating these social changes, these agitations. Here the governor decides he's not going to allow the Supreme Court in place. That he's going to use the national to keep these students from taking their places in these schools. So he the young lady that's behind the young African to focus on this big international issue, right? Federal authority. He's governor is that federal decisions don't matter, that federal laws don't. Now Eisenhower, to desegregate. a lot of parents start putting pressure on the school district and on the governor saying, we have to reopen. Actually follow the Brown versus Board.